The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and does not represent legal or accounting advice or counsel and should not be seen as such. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only, a conversation. We make no promises or assertions on how this information will impact your business, your personal life, or financial well-being. The information relayed does not imply endorsement or offer opposition to any specific organization, product, or services. One of the first lessons in getting into business is knowing how and when to get out. The second may be to know your audience, who they are, where they are, and what will they buy from me and how much. These two lessons hold true when it comes to selling your company as well. There's no room for head in the sand or it will happen when it will happen thinking. Succession planning needs to be part of everyday business planning because mitigating the risks and having a contingency plan in the event of divorce, disagreement, disability, distress, and death will drive essential value back into your company. This is as important as knowing who will buy your business and when and for how much. Now let's have a conversation.
Thanks. So, Laurie, my name is Jason Watt. I am a trainer of financial advisors and financial planners. I'm located in Edmonton. I've been in the business for about 17 years now. And in that time, trained thousands of people towards their life insurance licenses, towards CFP certification, Certified Financial Planner, and lots of work on the continuing education side. As you well know, we have a mandated CE requirement for almost all financial advisors in Canada. And then on top of that, I do a fair bit of volunteer work. I'm currently engaged in some efforts to make pro bono financial planning a more widely available activity, widely provided activity. I'm involved in my community and I'm involved in some veterans organizations as well. I'm married for 20 years and we have 3 children, a bonus daughter, and 2 grandchildren who are currently living with us.
Nice. We've known each other a long time. I had the real pleasure of knowing your mom and dad when they had started Business Career College, and I started by taking the continuing education with your father, Bob. And so, we've known each other since you came in, and through that time have really grown in each other's businesses respectively. Like there's a long breadth of understanding. And today I wanted to talk about succession planning, specifically in our industry of insurance brokers, financial planners, advisors, consultants, however you want to spread the gamut of what we call each other. And want to talk about the identity of an advisor to their business, to their clients, and specifically from your experience in being part of a family enterprise, selling that family enterprise, and that transition from being one of the partners in that enterprise to being part of the corporate culture of a larger organization.
And there's a lot to unpack there, of course, as you
There
well
is.
know. I know you just finished your CPA designation, so I'm going to guess that I'm not going to say anything here that's surprising to you today, but let's see. Um, so just on our front, so yeah, we were not strictly speaking an advisory firm, but I think we had a lot of overlap with with advisory firms. That's certainly our biggest clients were advisory firms. We were a family business that would have been comparable in scale to a lot of mid-sized advisory firms, a dozen employees and 3 family members. So I think that that's a comfortable size. And as you said, my parents were founders, and then I came into the business a little bit later on. So there was, I think, some very similar dynamics there to many advisory businesses. I think where we had success was we really talked about succession almost, I want to say from day one. We had some financial struggles early on, but when I came into the business in 2006, and really in about 2010, we started talking about succession. And even right from day one. So when I came on as an employee, I bought shares, like I wrote a check for shares. And that was helpful because we did at the time have another partner in the business. You knew Jane, of course, you know Jane. Um, and I think Jane sort of appreciated that I had written a check to come on board rather than, as sometimes happens in family businesses. And I get why this happens. I don't want to knock it, but it was, I had some skin in the game right from day one. I think that helped. And yeah, starting in about 2010, we started looking at, one day we would like to sell this business and what might this look like. And I would say in sort of from 2010 to about 2013, 14, it was something we would touch on about once a year. And then by 2015, 16, it was something that was more of a focus. We would talk about it, at least maybe a full day meeting once a year with myself and my parents. Jane was gone from the business by then, but really to talk about what do we have to do to make the business more saleable, and how can we get there. And that, I think, by the time the sale opportunities came around, we had talked about it enough and talked about some of the tangibles and intangibles that it wasn't such a shock. And to me, and I think you'll agree with this, there's nothing you can do better than just being prepared for it, right? It's, and emotionally prepared for it, I think.
That's when you touch on something so critical. One of the reasons I went for my SEPA was succession planning has been part of our business plan for a number of years. And, to say, okay, well, what is it that we're going to sell when the time comes? Are we going to sell just a block of clients, client names? What does that look like? And really, as I delved more into that planning, making it part of the day-to-day business strategy, I thought, okay, well, I have to learn more about this. I'm like interested in this. My clients are reaching that age or that maturity in their own business where it's going to become a factor, and I want to be able to talk coherently about that. And so I love that you had said almost from day one it was part of the business plan, because so many people, well, I said to somebody recently, don't get into business if you don't know how to get out of business. I mean, that's kind of the first rule of being an entrepreneur. And then somehow in the middle, we forget about that because our identity flips over and now we are our business. So you saying that it was part of that plan all along is very strategic in my mind. Did your employees know that was part of the plan?
Yeah, this is a tough question. So I'm going to give a lot of credit here to John Warrilow's Built to Sell radio podcast and his accompanying books. He's got Built to Sell, Automatic Customer, and he's got a book that came out last year that I haven't read yet, but I don't remember the title. But anyways, John Warrillow, well worth the follow, and has lots of great content. I had read his book and was listening to his podcast, and first off, so like this is really, it's such a good bit of content. He talks to people who have recently sold their businesses, and he asks them that, and that is a question he asks regularly. The conventional wisdom here is you cannot tell your employees that you're for sale, uh, because the concern is that then they feel insecurity about their jobs, which is justified. We can talk about that more in a minute. But they have that insecurity about their jobs, and then they sort of let something slip in terms of talking to clients or whatever. I am, and I it's such a common thing to hear, Lori. I'm a big fan of transparency. Okay.
Mhm.
And I believe that we did live that value of transparency. And just as an example, we had quarterly meetings, all staff. So this was everybody. This was not C-suite or not management or whatever. We had quarterly meetings where, first off, the financial information that was presented at the meetings was sort of an all hands effort. And so we had, staff like in fact, our most junior staff member produced a good chunk of the financial information that we would present at those meetings. And we would present to, again, all hands, our sales by customer, uh, trends and patterns in sales, uh, revenue and expenses, salary information was all anonymized. So like you couldn't pick out a salary on there, or I guess it was not even anonymized, it was bundled together. So it, you're not disclosing salaries, but really like they could see how much my expense claims were for driving to and from Calgary or whatever. Like it was all there, right? And I was transparent about my own compensation. I didn't for anybody else. I was fine with sharing mine. So we had a lot of disclosure. I think disclosure to a level that a lot of like people think that they are being transparent. So it was probably about 2018 or 19 in that quarterly meeting when I started talking about this prospect. I said, we might sell this business one day. And I was very open with the staff about it. And I did a few things here that I think a lot of business owners would not be comfortable with. And it's a hard thing to do. And I don't think it's for everybody. But I said, you should be looking at help wanted ads on a regular and whatever. Like you should be looking at interesting jobs for you on a regular basis. And if something shows up that's better than what you're doing here, come and tell me about it, right? Let me know what's out there. Um, and we did and before that, way before that, we had a person doing like an admin job for us in Calgary. She was our front desk person, and she was really good. She's still probably really good, and she ended up again finding one of those jobs and moving on to really bigger and better things. I had a guy in Calgary working for me who had, and you'd appreciate this, worked in the film business previously and a great job in TV. And now I don't know what this turns into today. I haven't been in touch with this guy for some time, but went to move on to a great job in film and TV. And I thought, like, great, right? I was always happy for our staff when they had something better show up. So I was, keep your resume current, look at jobs. And part of it is I want people coming to work for me who want to be there.
Yeah.
So I never saw it as a benefit to kind of handcuff people to their desks, right? I really wanted people who wanted to be there, who enjoyed being part of the team, who enjoyed contributing. So, sharing with staff, I didn't say like specifically, we're selling to this entity at this time, but it was at least 2 years before the sale of the business that we had talked to employees and said, if an opportunity comes along, it's something we would look seriously at. Um, when it did come along, when we had the offer to purchase and everything started sort of going, then you're a little more constrained. So legally, I had limitations on who I could tell. But anybody who sold the business will have gone through this, especially like it's not an advisory business. It was we had more sort of operations and processes that were a little bit unique to our business or our type of business anyways. And that meant we're in a full on, there was a data room set up, is very normal, where I was answering questions. Like the buyer had a list of 300 questions and had to go through each of those questions. And I said to them early on, I said, I can't do all this by myself. I need to bring a staff member on. I had one staff member who did have a lot of the operational knowledge. And I said, like, we're selling the business, or at least we're likely to sell the business. And I need your help with that. And he was very involved in the sale. But for the most part, well, in fact, other than him, there was no staff member who knew before we had assigned. Just trying to think here what day we told the staff. I think we told the staff on the day that the share purchase agreement was actually signed, which was about 2 months before the information became public, thereabouts anyways. And we didn't do anything offside. I was very upfront with the buyer as to who we were disclosing to and when. So
One of the core values that we look at when we're valuing that business is the value of the employees, of the talent. So going back to the podcasts and the books, I love the books. There's a lot of, Built to Sell is a great book. And, if you read Vern Harnish or you read the Traction book, one of the things they tell you is if you're going to get your business ready to sell, you have to be replaceable because
Yeah.
only the market will determine what you're worth. And in that, your people, your talent are the replaceable elements. So making them aware and making them integral to the business, I think is a key. And I'm not saying I have an answer for that, Jason. I'm just saying that employees themselves, they're pretty savvy. They know what's going on, especially employees who are involved in the day to day and are in the right seats, let's put it that way. But involving them in the process the way that you did, I think makes them also invaluable to the purchaser. So sometimes I think we walk away from a lot of that talent value that can drive the market cost of what the purchase multiple, if you would, of that business. So I like that transparency. Although I wouldn't have invited them to, seek happiness elsewhere, but how can they make themselves more integral to the job? But I'm not in that position that you had. So it's not a judgment. It's just what would I have done in that position? I don't, and I think that it was a brilliant way to either have them part of the process or seek happiness elsewhere.
And yeah, it wasn't ever, it wasn't like you suck and you have to go find something else to
Oh, no,
do,
no,
right?
I know that.
It's, but yeah, I really believe that people are, people have the right to be happy, and as much as we could motivate that, we wanted to. So now that said, I think that if I were, I'm never not going to be that transparent, I guess, Laurie, right? So,
Yeah,
I'm kind of
it's in your
figuring
nature.
out. Yeah, and yeah, I think it is. I think sometimes I'm too transparent, and it can make discussions like this uncomfortable because I have legal requirements for what I can and cannot say. But I think that I'll always do that. And you talk about preparing for succession sort of a second time around, knowing what I know now. I think that I would talk to an acquirer about sort of how transparent we have or have not been, and how that culture might or might not translate into an acquisition. Again, it's hard, and as businesses get bigger, it's harder to be that transparent. I think that's accurate. Um, so
When it comes to, I think you made a great concern there is, are one of the employees going to speak offside to a potential client? And so there's a real balancing act going on there.
yeah, and of course, in the advisory world, I know the big concern is that person going to leave and take 1,000 clients with them, right? Like that's the that's a big issue. And I get where that's a little bit more nervous. Um, I think in the advisory space, this really points to, and there's been some kind of ugly lawsuits around this with some very large firms last few years, when advisors are leaving and the extent to which the client relationship is owned by the advisor or by the firm. um, Sort of how far you can go with, and you and I have both seen Shane King at McLeod Law talk about this, sort of how far can you go with non-compete and non-solicit clauses. I don't envy advisory firms in those rules, right? As far as having to manage that, it's a really tricky area of employment law, and I don't know how I would crack that nut were I running an advisory shop.
Going back to those annual meetings with the three of you and succession would come up. As part of that succession plan, did you talk about not just selling the business, but what life looks like after the business? Was there a conversation that would include, okay, so now we've got the money and the business is gone. Now what?
Yeah, you would think so, but curiously, not really. We didn't, the issue, and I think some of what motivated this, as you well know, my father has had some health challenges. He's had MS for a very long time. Thankfully, mostly asymptomatic, but when it becomes symptomatic, it's never any fun. And I think that we always kind of took it for granted that there was going to have to be an exit plan, an exit at some point. And we did throw around the idea of me buying them out. This was this has now been mostly fixed, but the tax situation, or the 84-1 problem, you love how I get a reference the Income Tax Act in here,
I
Laurie.
do.
So the family business succession was not really available the way that we would have needed to do it under the Income Tax Act. And that was a problem. So, we did kind of accept that we were going to do sale to a third party. We did talk a little bit about it. And the assumption always, Laurie, was that my father was going to, and especially him, like my father was going to move into sort of a consulting role, find some work with whomever, like with regulators, doing some projects or that kind of thing. Um, and and we had chatted about that a little bit, and then opportunities would come up here and there. We watched the then CEO of FP Canada retire, and sort of how he did some consulting work afterwards, um, and thought like there's a good model. And it turned out that my father did virtually none of that. He really, when he retired, he was ready to do that kind of work, and he had talked to some people about it. He had some stuff queued up, but just never wanted to. Once he was done, he was done.
It's good that that worked out that way for sure. Because sometimes, and I think I spoke offline about this, the main fear for me, and it is a fear, so I'm just acknowledging that in the essence of transparency and wearing it
Yeah.
on the sleeve, right? I've been doing this a long time. This is 26 years of my life has been doing employee group benefits. It is part of me. And there's no such thing, as you well know, as a 40-hour week. I mean, we work till done. Like that's just the way it is. If that's 40 hours, 45, sometimes 60 hours, you're going to do it until done. And the idea of what's next, what's next when you're not looking after, I always call them my babies. What happens if I'm not looking after my babies?
Yeah.
And I think that's a tough, hard stop for me. And it's wonderful that Bob was able to make that transition. And yourself in that transition, how did you do?
It is interesting. Like you really do feel, as you suggest, a strong ownership of those client connections. I love to, see former students on LinkedIn, or, run to them at conferences, or in, whatever, out on the street, or whatever the case is. It's always great. Um, I did, so I'm going to give credit to Carl Richards here. For the financial advisors listening, you must listen to the Kitsis and Carl podcast. Carl has so many gems of wisdom, but he was a successful advisor, if I recall correctly, with Merrill Lynch, running a big money book with high net worth clients. And he sold his practice at some point, probably about 16 or 17 years ago now. And he said, when he sold, he was sure that his clients were all going to be sad and really miss him, and all that kind of stuff. And he said, like 6 months later, he realized that they were just happy to still be getting service, and the person he sold to, he'd chosen a good acquirer, and he's like, wow, they don't miss me at all. And um, I think there's always going to be some of that. We have to, we always like to envision ourselves as the sort of be all and end all for our businesses. And I do, like, there's people that I interact with at Business Career College who, I think, do put a lot of credence in, dealing with me. But for the most part, and again, I don't want to sound callous about this. I don't want to be ungrateful to our customers, but for the most part, people, they maybe talk to somebody else in their shop who said, go to Business Career College, do your CFP there. They, watch some of the videos, and really, they wouldn't know me if they ran into me on the street or what. Like, it's just, there's going to always be, there's like that Pareto principle. There's some people that interacted there and were happy to deal with you, but a lot of people where it's a textbook, it's an online course,
Yep.
and that's kind of it. So, I don't, want to oversell my importance to the business. And I think that's something that we often tend to do. We figure, I'm the only one who could do it my way. And that is just not the case. There's multiple ways to do things. There's people who can do what I can do. And I think we have to come to terms with that. So,
And that's the essence of ego, isn't it? When the ego gets in the way. And I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, because I talk about my babies. So if I think about it like the Russian doll, right?
mhm,
The Russian doll is that, I consider my clients my babies. I take care of them, but I'm not their baby. I'm not
right,
integral,
yeah,
right? They take care of their clients, the next layer of the Russian doll, they take care of their babies, right? And so on and so on and so on. So to your point, we're all replaceable, which then circles us right back to where we started is how do you get your business sellable? You make yourself replaceable. And in that, I think we do have to walk away from the ego that says, we are important to our client's business. No, is what we do important to the client's
right,
business, not me particularly.
yeah, yeah, that's right. I agree with that. That the whatever policies, procedures, the even the product, right? That's really what the client needs, um, and yeah, it's good to have good relationships with your clients, but people aren't paying for a relationship, right? They're paying to get an outcome. In my case, paying to get CFP certified, or paying to get their CE credits, or paying to learn something, or paying to get their life license. That's it. So
The value of learning, that's your whole business, is the value of learning. So if we look at your experiences that you've had in having a business, transitioning yourself, and constant evolution, what is your learning through that, both personally and from a business standpoint? What's been your learning?
I really thought that um, I was going to be pretty happy being an employee. Um, and it turns out it's been a long time since I was an employee, right? It's been 17 years since I was really an employee, and I, yeah, it turns out it just really wasn't for me. It's I'm maybe too much of a control freak, or something like that. I don't know exactly what it is when I see things being done that aren't being done exactly the way that I would do them, right? And it's naive to think that my way is the only way. That's not what I'm suggesting. But it is sometimes a case where you look at how things are being done, you say, well, that doesn't necessarily make sense to me. And some of that is just that, the person who's doing those things can't explain everything that's going on in their head. And I get that, right? I don't begrudge somebody doing things a different way than I would have done them. But I really thought I would be more okay with it than I was. So maybe that's something that I have to come to terms with. And as I'm writing my next chapter, this is a big part of what I'm thinking about.
You own your own experience. I think I'd said as well that back in the day, when I was an employee, I wasn't really a good employee. Like, let's face it. And I think the nature of the industry that I was in, both in radio and in newspaper, allowed me to not be a traditional employee. You make your own hours, you chase your own
Yeah,
stories, you are responsible for your own outcome. And and then, when you try to work in the regular corporate world, sometimes those things don't add up. But if you had to go back and do one thing differently than in that succession planning, that transition planning, outside of being, going from an owner to an employee, but I'm talking about the advisors you brought in, the experts that were needed in the process, could be any number of elements. What's the paramount thing that you would say, okay, well, we should have done this earlier in the process, or we should have done the one thing?
that's a good question, and I'm not sure. I'm honestly, I'm going to say I'm pretty happy with how that process went. I had a good advisory team. There was sort of a negotiator. I got the name of Jim Stout, who was on the other side of the deal, and I give all props to Jim. He could have been very adversarial, and he was very, I'll use your word here, collaborative. Yeah, just sort of sits in the middle of the deal and makes sure that all the parts fall into place. So yeah, just I don't know. Good to deal with, anyways. And he, um, so anyways, he was good. our lawyer was very good. So David Archibald at Sherrick really was responsive and I think billed fairly, helped me understand the parts of the deal that he knew that I might need help with. I worked with Shane King, actually an employment lawyer, to make sure the deal coming. So, I had the benefit here, Lori, of having worked with a lot of advisors and having talked about that an awful lot, like about building those good advisory relationships. We didn't have a business valuator involved. I don't think we needed one. A business is worth what somebody's willing to buy for it. And
That's
I think,
exactly what the
yeah,
market is willing to pay.
I think sometimes people go and pay for a business valuation expecting that they're getting, what the market is willing to pay. And really what they're getting is something that's probably useful for I hate to say it, for divorce or estate planning or tax planning. And that's good. Like we need all those things, but it's probably not an indicator of what an entity would actually pay for your business. And actually, I'll give props to my accountant here too. We were dealing with Jonathan Whitmore, who's now at MNP, and Jonathan was top notch as well, and has been so good to just help again understand it. And Jonathan was really good about talking to me at my level. I'm pretty comfortable with tax concepts, and Jonathan was able to sort of say, okay, knowing what you know, here's what else you need to know, right? So I had a good, and the other thing I should point to here is my coaching group. So I know you believe in the value of coaching and mentorship and so forth, and I have a paid group that I belong to, part of a tech group where I've had now for almost 5 years, where I've been part of a coaching group, and I used a different coach before that. I 100% believe that you must find a coaching relationship that works for you. It was so good just being able to sit down and sort of dry run ideas before you went and made them live. Um, it's
You and I are so simpatico because absolutely, I don't think we can ever be the be all to end all. So we need a good group of advisors. And you're right, we're in an excellent industry to allow us to see who really stands out in the industry. And yeah, I'm a huge proponent of being part of, those masterminds or coaching groups or whatever is the word for them. They are like forums. EO has the forum groups and things. I think those are imperative because it just allows you to, as you say, bounce that idea off and test run it in a very confidential way.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with that in terms of those advisory relationships. I can't think of anything, Lori. Maybe one thing at the moment of execution that I wish that I'd understood a little bit better. And it worked out well. I'm not like it. This actually ended up being very fair, and everything kind of landed where it ought to have. But when we had a whole discussion about um, enterprise value and working capital in the business, this was something I wasn't, I think, fully prepared for. It's a concept that I still, now, if I had to like teach it in class, I would still have to go back and relearn it. Um, but it's sort of the difference between, I'm going to say, the price on paper for the business and the dollar amounts that actually end up changing hands,
Yeah.
and
I
how
think
those change hands.
we call that the two numbers, right? There's your tax number and then there's your business number. And don't take anything that I said to say that I thought that the transition went poorly. That not at all. What I'm trying to do in this podcast is to be able to share from people's experiences. So I think you hit on all the right highlights there is that importance of collaboration, having the experts in the room to walk you through to a successful transition.
Now, the one thing I will point to that I is now, and it's the problem is it's long after a lesson learned, and I don't know how I would approach this, but I think that what I should have done, and this is dicey because it's sort of a burning your bridges approach to it, or burning your boats, I guess, as the case may be. But this, I don't. Now I look around at people who have sold their businesses, and it's a shock to me when somebody lasts more than about 2 or maybe 3 years, and mine was almost exactly 3 years after we sold to when I left. And I wonder if there would be, some structured arrangement where you could say, I know that I am going to be done like on the 30th day of the 36th month. That's it. I'm out. Would that be healthier for all involved? The
It's
business would
like
sort
a
of
goal setting, isn't it?
it is it would give the business an impetus to actually get more of the stuff out of your head into the business. It sets a more firm timeline. Um, I think it's realistic. I think that you know now that said, I do run into cases where people really do stick around for 7 or 10 or 12 or 15 years after an acquisition, but I don't think it's the norm. And
And nor do I think that the new owners are pleasantly pleased about it either. Strategically to say that I have experiences with new owners who the previous owner hasn't left. They don't have a mechanism involved that they can actually execute on. And so now they're almost in essence stuck with that consultant in the business that doesn't have that. So I think you make a really good point there. There's a lot to think about, not just prior to the transition and
yeah,
thinking about it as part of the ongoing success of your business, the going through it, having the right advisors and you having the right support system to get through, but then after, not just for the person who has sold the business, but the new owners coming in, how are they ever going to get their wings under them to fly that business?
yeah. And I tell this story a lot, but as you know, I used to be in the military, and in the military, the commanding officer role and the regimental sergeant major role, these are, big roles that you spend a career working towards. And then when you're in those roles, you have really a ton of control over, the lives of all kinds of people connected to you. Um, and you really get to put your stamp on that job. And the Army is pretty good about this. Typically, you only see people do a job for 3 years, give or take, and then get rotated out. So the tradition for a commanding officer is you take over command. And my old regiment just had this happen where Tom Bradley just took over command from Mike on you. And now Mike, the outgoing commanding officer, will not be in the armory for 3 years. He just won't go. He really just can't be there. He won't talk to sort of anybody in like the command team other than Tom uh, for 3 years. There's really like a clean break there where you don't have this kind of muddying of the waters, old guard and new guard. The the new guard has, the say, and that's just how it works. That's the sort
It's
of
leadership
expectation.
too. It allows somebody to be a leader, and it allows the previous leader to leave a legacy, if you would.
For advisors, I'm going to talk to the advisors in the room. And I run into this complaint all the time from young advisors coming in where they say, I was brought in to be part of a succession plan. I was brought in 3 years ago, and now we're 3 years into it. And I've heard like there's no progress, nothing. This is, I don't know, definitely in the top five kind of complaints that I hear in this business. If you're an advisor who is attempting to retire, who is, doing the retirement work, or, has this on their mind, you think you're doing a succession plan. Okay. You're only actually running a succession plan if there is a transition happening to that young advisor. That person has to be assuming some share ownership or assuming some control over their business. It You can't put that person in a situation where and I find this all the time, they have to sort of, yes, they have to earn it to some extent. I get that, but you can't make that person sort of linger for 10 years waiting for them to be ready to take over the business. They are never going to be what you are.
No, no.
So if you've got the right person, if that's your succession plan, then start that transition and start it today. And if you don't have the right person, then you do that person the favor of, either terminate that relationship or make it clear to them that they're not part of the succession plan, and go find the succession plan that you actually want, which might be die in your chair, which I am not a fan of. I just ran into one, Lori, and not to get too far off topic here, but it's an advisor who um, is in early stages of dementia. And this sort of became obvious to that person's teammates when this person is trying to get their continuing ed credits for the year and just can't get through a course, like can't watch an hour-long video and do the quiz at the end or whatever. And you don't want to end up dragging your clients down that sort of dementia path with you. It's really tough. It exposes them to a lot of risk.
Yeah, and it's sad too. I'll give kudos to my very first partner, Scott Murdoch, and we founded MP Benefits together, so it was Murdoch Power, and I was his succession plan. And the one thing, whether it was his background as being a city cop or whatever, everything went into writing, and it wasn't a set in stone contract. It
Hmm.
gave us both an ability to get out. So if I didn't perform as a young person coming in to learn the business, or he had an ability to say, okay, well, you know um you know get out, or and buy out, and those things. But we did have that 5-year plan, and we did have it in writing. And when it came time at the ninth hour, and if he's listening to this, I'll say it with all due love, is when it came down, I'll never forget being in the lawyer's office doing our share transition and that payment that had been agreed to 5 years previous. And he turned to me and he said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And without hesitation, in that same scenario that you're talking about, I was ready. I was
Correct.
ready. I had built 5 years and invested into the business in order to be able to take it on. There was no going back for me. But I think you hit on a really good point there, that if they're going to do it, do it. But I would add to that is put it in writing. Hold somebody accountable to it.
Yeah, that's a great advice, Laurie. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really good. I've learned a lot, and I hope I didn't put you on any too much transparency there, but you answered really well, so I appreciate that.
I appreciate the opportunity, Laurie. I find it interesting talking about this, and it is nice to get to share your experiences with it. I hope there's something to learn from it for everybody.